Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
So thank you very much, everybody. Let's set up the screen here and see what we're looking like.
Can I see what we're looking like? Not from here.
We did that incorrectly again.
I've never seen you before, but I've certainly felt you beautifully.
Oh, we'll try this again.
We're still on the disclaimer. Okay, now we have the Cash Foundation, and there you go. You zoomed right in on it. Thank you, Alex.
Well, perfect. We like perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to the North American Knowledge Team meeting. And we're so honored that we were represented by almost every continent here. And, you know, we've changed the time. And I don't know if we've gained an hour or we've lost an hour. And so that, you know, it changes the relationship between the European times and the North American times. But I wonder what that does to the universal clock. I wonder how that relationship changes. Anyway, that's just pure speculation, isn't it? So I want to welcome everybody. And here we are at the change of the seasons. It's very cold in Canada. Seems the tropics are descending on the northern United States. So congratulations to you, and don't get a sunburn. And let's get into it. This is Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are discussing the intermediate inertia. And we are bringing up the subject of interdependency. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada, and it is March the 9th, 2025. And this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we say it's an intermediate inertia, which is a continuation of teachings that started several years ago. And what we've been trying to do is to distill all the knowledge. And we say this repeatedly because we are looking to gather in an enormous number of new knowledge seekers because we're not a political organization. We are and we're not a religious organization. We are a scientific organization, and specifically spaceship scientific organization. And so that means it's all encompassing. And you say, well, you know, I am not a scientist, so I don't need to know this information. Well, you have to understand that we are all space travelers. And as such, we all have an interdependency. And it's hard to understand that, because for most of us, we don't need to know the specifics. We just need to know how, it's going to affect our daily life. And everyone needs to take away what they wish and contribute in a way that makes sense for them. And we have to stay within our capabilities, because we're stuck on this hesitancy highway, and we're all stuck on this hesitancy highway, and there's a reason for it. And so we're looking for that reason, but the ramifications of it, of course, are that it's the lowest energy state. And we keep saying it's the lowest energy state because when we're talking about inertia, the inertia goes from the higher to the lower energy state, and the physical state is the lowest. But we are at the frontier crossroads now. And when we say frontier, we're looking at the history. Look at the history of Canada, look at the history of America, look at the history of the Western world. And it is a short history. When we look at the history of Europe and the Middle East and the Far East, it's a long history, so we're just at the frontier, the Wild West. And we love our chuck wagon tailgate parties, don't we? To borrow some football terms, because we depend on accurate field goal kickers. They can affect the outcome of the games, can't they? And one of the famous teams, of course, is the San Francisco 49ers. And we're not talking about the 1949ers. We're talking about the 1849ers, because we have to remember the gold rush. And so this continent was founded by explorers, pioneers, and miners. And then, of course, we all need to stake our mining claim on that plasma highway to our little pie in the sky, because that's all we're given, is that little tiny piece of pie. And then we look out into the rest of the sky, and it's like, well, how come I've got my piece? Who is looking after the other piece? And how do we get there? And that's kind of beyond our knowledge. And is it? Is it really beyond our knowledge, or is it beyond our questioning? Because obviously we got here, and how we got here means that we had the knowledge. And that knowledge is now articulated in the books by Marian Tavakoli-Kesh, book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And we see that it's coming together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. So somehow the forces are coming together. And when they come together, that means they came from somewhere. And so book number 2 talks about the structure of light. But not only did it come together, but from there it goes to another. So now all of a sudden we have a connection. And then we look at the origin of the universe as described in book number 3, and we see the splitting up into 2 universes. Man's universe, of which we have a little tiny piece, and then we have the sister universe, which is a much bigger place, but can't seem to see it. But if we want to understand plasma science, we have to recognize that it exists. And as the smart detective said, if we don't have the body, how can we tell that there's a crime? And if we don't have the gun, how can we tell that there was a murder? And if we can't find the bullet, how can we associate the gun with the body that isn't there? And so the evidence is missing. But in the plasma science, the missing evidence is evidence. And so we find that for 368 weeks, Rick Kremen and the Universal Council are trying to bring together one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And we say it's the Universal Council, but we seem to be missing some members, don't we? We're missing the members of the Universal Council, because the only members we have on this particular council are the ones from Earth. And that's our little tiny perfect world. So when we bring all the members of the Universal Council together, then we can say we represent Earth, just like we're doing every week in the Knowledge Seekers workshops and also in the other sessions like today, where we bring members from other continents together. So we all come together and we have to follow the rules, you see. But what's our problem? We have rules. And, you know, let's ask a serious question. I mean, seriously. Did someone read the 10 Commandments to the moose? That's a serious question. How about the 10 Commandments to the chicken? Or the dove? Or the fish? We have commandments. And we were shortchanged. Yours truly here only learned about 10. But now we are being exposed to the fact that there's 24. And why are these things being hidden from us? And how come some people know and some people don't? What is the problem? Is the education not universal? Or is the education for some and not for others? Or is it just a point of view? And so we're trying to get on the plasma highway. We have to, you know, pull out the map and see exactly where it is. And we find that it's a lot farther away from the Earth and the physicality than we originally thought. But interestingly enough, we are able to get on the plasma highway on Earth because, you see, the transmission highway is an inertia field. And as such, we have frequency and we have pressure and we have heat and we have a nice touchy-feely environment. But there's a transition highway which changes things. And then, of course, there's a transmutation highway which really changes things. But, you know, it's a problem for us because it's not in our immediate sphere of reference. And so on a scientific basis, we don't see the connection of the plasma highway because we don't see the connection with the carbon inertia highway. So as we said, this is part of the intermediate inertia teachings, which is very, very basic. And so it's hard for us to get on this inertia highway unless we understand where are the entrances and where are the exits. So there's an anomaly here because there is a consistency with the basic physicality. We have carbon 12 as our physicality, but that carbon 12 is part of an inertial field. There's another carbon 12. We have to take that into account, but we don't see it. Or we do see it and we can't tell the difference. It is hard to tell the difference because they seem to be twins, but together it's carbon 24. And the reason this became obvious not in the physicality, but once we got into the transition state, we see there's a carbon 14 and a carbon 10. And I said, wait a second. That's a carbon 24 when you add that up. And it changes the ratio. Because the carbon 12 to carbon 12 would be a 1-to-1 ratio. Now all of a sudden we have a 1.4-to-1 ratio. And then if we go to the transmutation state, we have a carbon 16 and a carbon 8. That still is consistent with a carbon 24, but we have now a 2-to-1 ratio. And so we find that the ratio increases in strength because it increases in number. And so that indicates a flow of energy. And that's one of the things that we are always seeking. We're seeking energy. But it's a two-way street. And so we have a hard time defining which street is it. Because it could be on the coming street, or it could be on the going street, or it could be a 2-lane highway, or it could be going in opposite directions. So many choices. And then, are we only seeing half the picture? Because we only see what we see, and although it sounds very obvious that we can't see what we can't see, but it's true, we can't see what we can't see. We only see what we can see. But some people can see more. So in other words, many of us are only seeing half the picture. And some of us are seeing that there's more. And there has to be more, isn't there? There has to be more. So everything that we see is actually a plasma inertia junction. And if we recognize that we have higher and lower energy states, then we could have a higher junction, right? Where we bring the transition matter from one dimension and a transition state from another dimension and bring them together to create another dimension. 1 and 1 is 2. But it could be a medium junction where a higher state and a lower state come together in the middle. Or it could be a low junction where the higher state and the medium state come down to the lowest energy state, which of course is our physicality, and that is the lowest energy state. So when we look at the plasma inertia junctions, we have to see that it's a coming together in possibilities where we could have the transition from a lower state and the transition from a higher state coming together at the point of another state. And so that junction is an in-between, a medium kind of junction. What causes the difference? We only see the difference, but we don't know what causes the difference. We haven't specified. And so to look at the map, we see the conservation of inertia, which involves transfer states. And we try and keep a balance between the magnetical and the gravitational. But if we look at the inertia field on one side, so there's a magnetical gravitational relationship, let's say in the GAN state, and then there would be a magnetical gravitational relationship on the other side to balance it. And it could remain in the GAN state, or it could be in a nanostate, or it could be in the atomic state, or it could start in the atomic state and elevate to the nanostate or elevate to the GAN state. So there's all this convergent susceptibility, and we don't know why. And most of us don't get a chance to answer that question because we assume that there's a consistency. We rely on it. But some people consistently like a chaotic environment because it implies randomness. So how do we go from a random to a consistent? And so we ask, well, what factor is at play? And many of us don't ask that question because the religious community tells us, and we accept that. And the scientific community tells us, and we don't challenge that. And then, of course, there's a practical consistency. And this is good because you're born, you grow up, you go to work, you get old, and life is good. And is that it? Or should we be asking questions? Well, let's understand something. Who are we going to ask those questions from? So maybe we should ask the universe, because how was the universe created? And so we see that it exists from energy. And since energy is always positive, then the charge of the energy has to do with the direction of flow. And if the direction of flow means that there's motion, when is there motion? Well, we find there's always motion. And if there's always motion, then that involves all things. So when we talk about all things, that includes you. You are part of all the things. That includes the sun. That includes the atoms. And so when we see the universal order of creation of matter, the coming together of matter, dark matter, and antimatter, and we say, okay, well, all things are working in combination. So that's on one energy state. And it is in combination with another that is on the same state, energy state, but not necessarily, because it can transition to other energy states. So it can go higher or lower. And how high? Well, I don't know. What is the factor? So we have to have a basic plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And this is in direct conflict with the self-serving needs of the planet, where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. And so that also becomes a conflict point. But it, in fact, is also a binding zone, because one of the reasons that we eat is to grab that energy, is to fulfill our energy binding needs. So there's a self-serving need for that. So some of us eat cows and some of us eat carrots. And are those the only ways? For the majority of us, it fulfills our self-serving needs, but actually it's at the expense of others. And so we say, well, are we taking it at the expense of the cow? Or are we taking it at the expense of a carrot? And how is that different? When we kill someone, aren't we taking the energy from them at their expense? And so there's a commonality in this self-serving activity, and it transcends every type of being on this planet. And in fact, has to affect the planet. So there's a consistency. And we know there's a consistency because every day the sun comes up. And every day if we're alive, we enjoy the physical state. But the way we have our physical state is not like a polymer, which consistently reproduce. So that consistent reproduction is a chain replication. But there's another chain replication in the plasma state. But that plasma state has to make a choice, and it has to make a consistent choice. Is it replicating a polymer, or is it replicating a protein? Because the proteins also consistently reproduce. And we know that is true, not because we're scientists, but because we all have bumps and bruises and scrapes, and we see that cuts and scrapes can be healed. And that, thank goodness, is due to cellular repair. And it's consistent. So there's a tensity relationship between what we call a maggrav, because it's in balance with the magnetical gravitational field forces. And if they are absolutely equal, well, then you can't see it because you don't know if it's magnetical or if it's gravitational. So the scientific community just deals with the awake state, right? And in that awake state, we believe in the conservation of magnetic fields, but we also have to take into account the conservation of energy. So we try and balance that off, whereas the spiritual scientific community takes into account the dream state and speaks of the spirit and speaks of the soul, and doesn't see the actual motor relationship between the spirit and the soul. So it's up to the plasma science to add to the knowledge, because it has to bring these two scientific states together. And depending how it's done will affect the rate of change. So the rate of change is not consistent. It's dependent. It depends on something else. So when we talk about us as four-wheelers, we are contained vehicles on this planet. And yet we go into our vehicles, which is another containment. So we are a containment within that containment. And we like to do that because we need the training wheels to understand the difference between the creation and the decay. So if we only see half the picture, then we only see the out tensity. But if we were to see the other half of the picture, then we could see the intensity. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that in order to maintain this balance, there has to be a balance between the creation and the decay, which is the balance between the out tensity and the intensity. But that's on one side. Then there has to be a counterbalance of the natural decay and the natural creation, which likewise is a balance between the intensity and the out tensity, although it could be a weaker field. And so the stronger field and the weaker field are bound together. And that creates an inertia bonding. And so we, as observers, interpret what we see. And not all of us see the same thing. So we kind of fudge things, don't we? So we're actually the inertia bonding fudge factor, trying to be a little bit more precise. We understand there's a magnetical dependency, so that is the rule of attraction, which is represented in our gravitational intensity. But that gravitational effect is a feedback. It's the repulsion, magnetical out tensity, which is part of the feeding. It's, wait a second. If we're giving out, how do we get fed? And if we only have the feedback, where's the feeding coming from? What are we missing? So what we're missing is the point of view. And if we look at the field strength of the electron and the field strength of the neutron, the combination of force fields are identical, but clearly the electron and the neutron are not of the same strength. So something is causing a difference. And we know this is true because we are all part of the humanity civilization. And so we're all dependent on each other because we're all part of the earth space. But in order for us to have our self-serving needs, we have to entertain a contention. So we have to segregate. We have the Asian community and the Pacific and the African and the white, the black, the Latino, the American Indian. And so we're all interdependent. We're all part of the humanity. But, you know, we're all struggling to survive because we need to maintain our independence. So each of us is struggling to maintain our independence. And the only way that we can all have prosperity is if there's peace. And so clearly, the people who are trying to bring peace on this planet are the problem children. And the reason I say that is because the warmongers are striving greatly to keep our contention going. If it wasn't for the peacekeepers, we wouldn't need warmongers. But it's those peacekeepers which are causing the wars. So we need to eliminate the peacekeepers. If we eliminate the peacekeepers, then we won't have any wars. But then there wouldn't be dependency. And then that wouldn't work, would it? Because that would mean that the warmongers would have to disappear. So that's why we look at the cups of life, because they are representative of the new plasma science. It's showing us the monatomic science and how it works when we bring different energy states together. So we start with the physical state, we introduce the nano state, and we produce the GAN state. Oh, wait a second. And we did this in our kitchens. We did this in our garages, in our backyards. And we created all sorts of ganses like CO2, calcium, copper, and zinc, and water, and amino acid. And some of us are going into gold production. And these are all manifestations of GANS radiance. And some of us are experiencing the plasma feeding. And now we have to ask ourselves a different kind of question, you know? Are we satisfied or are we hungry? And then when we look at the cup of man and we see that it's a bringing together of the cup of emotion and the cup of physicality. So the cup of man is dependent on the interaction of these two. But then there's a third one, the cup of soul, and when we bring that, we now have a different kind of interdependence. And all of this interdependence manifests from individual magnetical gravitational relationships. And so we see that the cup of the universe, which is the food of the mind, has a similar construct, where you look at the cup of life and you have the copper and the zinc, and it brings together the carbon and the amino acid. But when you look at the hemispheric synchronization of the left and right part of the brain, it creates a field, a gravitational field, higher energy, and it gives to the lower energy. But that energy that it gives to has to already be manifest. So we have to go beyond and understand that it isn't just the soul of the man and the inertia of the soul of the man, but the soul of the earth, which is the inertia of the earth. And so the bringing together of that is the inertia of the mind. And then we have the inertia manifestation of the soul of the physicality. And then we have the inertia of the physicality of the man and the physicality of the earth. So we have an inertia of the mind. We have an inertia of the soul of physicality. And we have an inertia of the physicality. And so we have the grand central station of inertia of all the earth ganses. And they're all the earth ganses. And they're representative of the earth. But some of these ganses are representative of other planets. And so the earth planet is positioned and it rotates in an orbit that has a positional consistency. And it is always consistent between what it is and what it is not. So we're not Venus and we're not Mars, but we're always in between. But then Mars has the same rules, and Jupiter has the same rules. Saturn has the same rules, but they don't have the same ganses. They have some of the same ganses. They might have more of the same ganses, different ganses. But one thing they all have a consistency is that the sun is at the center of the solar system, and therefore we could say the sun is our neutron. And we are all on planet Earth, electron. So we now see that there's an atomic dependency. One dependency is the neutron, the bringing together of the antimatter, dark matter, and matter. The change from the neutron to the atom has a different structure. It has an electron and a proton. And then there's a release of the PM tick, which is another change in structure. And so what we're seeing is a difference in size. How we determine that size is we did it by mass. So the neutron has a higher mass, the electron proton has a lower mass, and there was something missing because it didn't balance the equation. So, like the smart detective, you look here and you look there, and there it is, gone. And that's the release of the PM tick. And so what we have is the Earth space range details, and they're consistent. When we say that they're consistent, they're all on Earth. And they all seem to be in a fairly specific place. And when they gather in that specific place, then there's enough of it that we can actually go and mine it. So there are copper mines and gold mines and silicon mines and aluminum mines and all sorts of mines. Gallium, germanium. So in the beginning, the neutron, the generic neutron, came before the generic atom and the generic PM tick, isn't it? Because it came from the darkness. And you look up into the sky, it's pretty dark. And as God said, let there be light. And so light came. And that was the principal matter, the PM ticks. And when it came, it created the antimatter, dark matter, and the plasma matter. And that was a convergence. But before it came, it had to come to a place. That place was Earth. So the Earth was also a manifestation of that convergence. So there's a convergence of the plasmagen with the convergence of the Earth space, which creates another MAGRAV condition, which is a field interaction or inertia. And of course, it's gravitational. And so that is what constitutes the matter plasma dimensions, where we have the physical dimension, which we can touch and we can see, but we also have a plasmatic matter, which we can't touch and we can't see. But one is the feeding and one is the feedback. And so since we can't see the feeding, we only see the feedback. And this is how we run our lives. We are feedback dominant. And are we doing the right thing? Or we understand that we have a core dependency, but there's another part of us. And we all know that we can cast a shadow. And some of us can cast a really long shadow. But since we are the same casting a short shadow or a long shadow, then that shadow is dependent on something else. And that's the relationship between the electron and the neutron. Or is it the relationship between the positron and the electron? Or the relationship between the proton and the neutron? So fundamentally, in the plasma science, it's a relationship between the magnetical field forces and gravitational field forces. So the gravitational conformation, of course, is the hydrogen. And we know it's hydrogen because it has a color spectrum. And that color spectrum is light. He said, let there be light. So let the light of the hydrogen show. And what it shows is actually what it's not. The bands in the emotion in the spectrum show you what it needs. And that is what it absorbs. But the emission spectrum shows you what it is. And the difference between two is the unique fingerprint. So let there be light coming to you, but understand, as the gravitational feeder, the gravitational feeder can feed the light also. Oxygen does the same thing, except that oxygen is a lot more gravitational than hydrogen. So, but the rules are the same. It has a unique fingerprint. So it is also emitting light. So we talked about dependency, and we've talked a little bit about the hydrogen, but the hydrogen always comes in pairs. Well, remember, so does nitrogen and so does oxygen. But there's a unique characteristic here, is that the hydrogen can be orthohydrogen, where the poles are aligned. And this is a problem because opposite poles attract and like poles repel. So in the ortho, the two north poles will repel. But you see the two south poles will also repel. So let's flip one over and create the parahydrogen. And so now we have the north pole on one being of an opposite polarity, opposite charge, and it'll attract. But wait a second, it's still a straight line because the other side is also having opposite poles, and it'll also attract, but equal strength. So the hydrogen molecule can have a covalent bond, despite the fact that in the pairing, the poles can flip. And this flipping is kind of important because when you start to create organic beings, they have to link up. And that link creates a chain. So in order for that chain to exist, the poles have to flip, because there's a covalent bond between, but then there's an existence of the essential Margraaf condition, which is to say, a balance between the magnetic and gravitational field. But when we change the field strength, then we create bending. And then we can create other elements. And so now we have, in addition to the hydrogen, the oxygen, we have the carbon and the nitrogen. And we put it together in a star formation, which we call an amino acid. And this is what we eat. So we are actually amino acid foodies. And each amino acid is brought together by all of these individual elements. So these elements have a containment dependency. So hydrogen is hydrogen and carbon is carbon. But when we put all those together, they create an amino acid as a compound. And that leads to a cellular consistency. But the cells regenerate consistently, and the organelles in the cells regenerate consistently, and the organs regenerate consistently. So the regeneration is targeted consistently. And we say the nose knows. But the regeneration of the cells on the nose are not the cells from the toes. We have a targeting consistency, and yet all of the cells are made the same way. And so we have this plasma chain. And so we understand how the poles flip around. But then we have another problem here, is because they are still in balance, but clearly the external tensity and the internal tensity are different. So because of the compression on the internal side, it creates an internal pressure. And so that becomes the gravitational side. So as we say, the neutron is in the center. So it's a gravitational neutron is in there, where we have all the different organelles. And then, of course, we have the out-tensity interaction because it has to maintain this gravitational stability. So there's a feeding and there's a feedback. So the difference between the two dimensions, which is the surface, is the volume, which is 3 dimensions. But then we could take the surface of the sphere, and that's a different description. So the comparison of 2 dimensions and the comparison to 3 dimensions is the same. So we progressed to the 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3. And so the rules are the same. And the feeding dimension is the belief. And the feedback dimension is the experience. And as we say, we're feedback dominant. So that means we're dominated by our experience, not realizing that our belief is feeding that. So what we're talking about is in the intermediate inertia. So the 1 + 1 = 1. But from here, we have an inertia feeding of 1, but which one? Because although each one is 1, they're all different. They're not the same one. So something has to determine that. So let's look at the field strength feeding dimension. And we say that the inertia of 1 comes together from the feeding of 2. And those 2 have to be different, because if they were absolutely identical, well, then they wouldn't be visible, or they wouldn't exist. Well, so which is it? Are they visible or they don't? Are they not visible or they don't exist? Are they visible or do they exist? So let's say that they do exist. You see the green ball, you see the red ball. Well, let's add another one, because that only took care of the first one. So the first one is 1 feeding strength dimension, and the other one is another feeding dimension. But now we have an inertia field from the orange ball and the blue ball. So let's have an inertia field of the last one, which is another feeding dimension, but not the same one, of the yellow ball and the purple ball. So now we have the inertia of 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3. So the 3 is an inertia field of the first ones. But the first ones are still there. They're still feeding. And they all have a field strength. And the 3, which is the combination of those 3 fields, is still there. And it has a field strength. So that becomes an inertia field. But that's a feedback field. Whereas the other fields are feeding fields. So each dimension is a feeding field, but each dimension is different. Why is it different? What causes that change? So some of us can say, well, the difference between one and the other one is the color. And then the difference between the third one is the color. And the color is the same difference between the first one and the third one. So each one is different based on the color. But what caused that color? Was there a feeding change? So is the first one, we now have the red and the purple as being part of the feeding dimensions. Wouldn't that change the field strength of the red one? And the green ball and the yellow ball are now feeding the third field. Wouldn't that change the field strength? We still have a balance. We still have 1 + 1 + 1. Not the same one, but they're all feeding. So what happens to the field combination, the inertia field of the three? Is it the same? It would stand to reason, wouldn't it? Because you're still maintaining the same field strengths that are part of the inertia feeding. But not really, because the first one now is not the same as what it was, and the third one is not the same as what it was. The second one is the same as what it was. So we have created an inertia feeding change. But what happens when we scramble everything? Let's say an inertia feeding scramble. Let's mix all the colors up. So now we have another inertia field strength, but not the same one. And clearly not in the same position, because all of these balls are of a different size. So the inertia position is determined by the size. So if you want to only look at the one aspect of it, the feedback, you can clearly see that what we're missing is the feeding, but there's more to it than that. We're missing the feeding of the feeding inertia, because it's the feeding inertia which manifests into the inertia field. So if we wanted to look at the colors and put a relationship together, and let's put it in simple terms, as we talk about the nanotechnology, let's hypothetically measure these colors in nanometers. And so what we find is that the size of the sphere, if it was based on color, would change in size, and that there's a progression. The progression, say between the 7 nanometers and 5 nanometers, is 2. That's a gradient. The progression from 2 nanometers to 0 is 2. That's a gradient. The first one and the second one are the same gradient. So the gradient charge would be the same, even though they're involving 2 different colors and even though they would be in different locations. So therefore, if we were to look at that gradient from the yellow to the blue, that's a medium-sized gradient. And then if we look at from the red to the blue, that's a larger gradient. Well, interestingly enough, the difference in the gradient is a gradient. So there's a high gradient, a medium gradient, and a low gradient. And that represents the charge, because the charge goes from the high gradient to the low gradient. Just like if you were in a toboggan sliding down a snowy hill. Start at the top and you work your way down. At the top, you have lots of energy. And when you get to the bottom, well, when the toboggan stops, you've run out of energy. And that's the gradient charge, positive to negative. And we see that the positive to negative gradient goes from the higher to the lower. And we see that the maggrav size involves the relationship between the gravitational and magnetical. And the gravitational is larger and the magnetical is smaller. And this is what we talked about, surface to volume ratios. The higher the negative charge, the smaller the particle. So in this case, the smallest sphere is the purple sphere, and the largest sphere is the red sphere. So the red sphere is gravitational based on size, and the purple is the smallest, and so it is a higher negative charge. And so it is the giver. And this has been a difficult point to put across, because the higher size has a lower density. The smaller size has a higher density. The higher density has more intensity, because the smaller size has more density. So the density becomes gravitational. And the out density, which has less density, is magnetical. So all of a sudden, the smaller sphere is the giver, because the higher gives to the lower. And what is true in rules with respect to the physicality is true in the rules of the plasma science. And what is true in the plasma science is true in the outer space density as well. So when we're looking at our physicality, we have to understand that our history is a small history, and we are the pioneers in that history. And so we have to look at our history as either a reflection of what we've done as pioneers, or that is an illusion, because the true reflection is of the historical context of the entire universe. And so if we look at the basic structure of the amino acid, the star formation, and we provide the pattern, we get the energy, then we create the maggrav condition, the matter state condition, and we have the feeding by way of the soul. So now we understand that the core dependency is coming from the relationship of the magnetical gravitational relationship, and therefore, based on surface to volume ratios, the electron is negative and the neutron is positive. But there's an interdependency. So it's not just the interdependency between the electron and the neutron, but it's also an interdependency of the magnetical consistency, because we have different neutrons, we have a different number of electrons, we have different atoms. So if they're all the same, how can they be different? And this is where the flaw sits. We can never answer the question, how big is large? Because it's not a standalone question. We say that two of the most important forces on this planet are the weak nuclear forces, which are far. But the far nuclear forces are actually strong because they involve the planets. And the strong nuclear forces are actually near. But since they involve the atoms, these nuclear forces, which are near, are actually weak. And so that's where we have the confusion. So the confusion is ours, but the core consistency is there because the nuclear forces are in the nucleus. So there is a core consistency. All we have to figure out is how do we navigate the black hole transmutation? Which side of it are we on? Are we in the physicality? Are we in the transition state? Or are we in the transmutation state? Or can we see that there's an interdependency between the physical state and the transition state? Or it could be from the physical state to a transition state of a higher energy state. Or it could be from a higher energy state to an even still higher energy state. It all reflects on the interdependency. And now we can say, what is the matter state inertia? So what we see are the beautiful colors of the physicality, which represents our matter state. But then there's the dark matter, and then there's the antimatter. So we have to understand that the inertia field of what our existence comprises of comes together from these three energy states. But before we can come here, we have to come to some place. That some place has to exist. So the Earth space matter state is also an inertia field, and it goes by the same rules. So we said that the atomic state is the weak nuclear force, and the planetary state is the strong nuclear force. But either way, it's a matter state inertia. And so here we have the matter state inertia of the atomic state and the matter state inertia of the Earth space. And they come together. And then, of course, there's our humanity, which is part of the matter state inertia. And that's coming together. And it is also following the same rules. And this becomes very important to understand because it starts to answer the questions that all of us have been asking. And you wonder why we can't get the answer? Well, if we don't understand that the answer is missing, because when you look at the surface to volume ratios and how the negative charge is related and how the higher strength feeds the weaker strength and which one's the giver and which one's the taker. So we have to understand that the surface to volume ratios are really the inertia to field strength ratios, where the incoming field strengths affect the inertia, and the inertia is a product of the incoming field strengths. And we, as humanity, are individuals, but so are chickens, cows, fish, and lettuce. And we choose to eat them. So it's really the observer to the field strength ratios, isn't it? We are the inertia field. So there's the matter state plasma, which is part of our emotion. And then we create this matter state inertia. And then we create this matter state physicality, which is our existence on this planet. And combined with this planet, we have this matter state gravitational stability. And we are the gravitational neutron because we are the observer inertia field. So if you can't see it, how can you observe it? You have to be a good detective. So a good detective understands the observer field strength susceptibility. We have beliefs and we have experiences. And it is truly our beliefs that are part of the feeding dimensions. So we experience our beliefs because in some places today is a cold day and in some places it's a warm day. But that doesn't tell you if it's a good or a bad day. So we are the gravitational confirmation of what's going on, and we are the observers. So the energy exchange follows a sequence. The lowest energy would be the magnetic, then it graduates to electric, electromagnetic, up to atomic, nuclear. We're beyond nuclear into the plasma, the soul of the body, and the soul of the man. These are all different energy levels, and they all operate by the same rules because it's a two-way street. In other words, the natural creation is the attraction and repulsion forces plus the magnetical, which is affected by the outintensity. And the natural decay is the repulsion and attraction forces plus additional gravitational, which is part of the intensity. So our emission stems from our MAGRAV condition plus the magnetical. And our absorption is founded on the MAGRAV plus the gravitational intensity. So the Earth space transmutation state for us is the coming together of these inertia fields, which affect our inertial field of existence. And our inertial field of existence at this point in time is based on the Earth space. But the Earth space came from outer space, and we came from outer space. And that space is the transmutation state. So every gravitational state is a substitution state, whereas the transference of the gravitational dominance is at the point of substitution. So the crossover is where the intensity equals 0 and the outintensity then equals 0. So the gravitational conformation remains, or the gravitational conformation dissolves. So the substitution point is somewhere in the black hole field. And we are, in terms of our understanding, basing our science on the maggrav atomic state, or we go beyond to the monatomic state, the polyatomic state, enter the plasma state, or even go one step beyond. But if we go one step beyond there, then what's to stop us from going one step beyond the atomic state, breaking the Coulomb barrier of our physicality? So as long as we stay within that containment field, we have this Earth-space consistency. And as we discovered from the Sanya conference last year at this time, there's gold in them hills. And we can create it. And we can create it on demand, just the same way as we create our existence. But when we look at our existence, which is the inertia product of the feeding system, and we can see that duality in the bottom right-hand corner. But do we understand the interdependency? In other words, we are all together in our confusion, or we are all together in our advanced knowledge. And can we affect our neighbor? Can we dominate our neighbor? Or do we have to go to war with our neighbor because our neighbor wants to be peaceful? Can the neighbor coexist with the other neighbor if that neighbor does not share that belief? Well, obviously we can, because the interaction is dependent on if we allow it. Will we allow the abuse to continue? Because that's what it is. So, do we become warmongers with the warmongers, or do we accommodate and allow them to learn the consequences of their actions? Because our actions and their actions are interdependent. Because we're all part of the Earth space. We're all part of this maggrav, and we all have this different transmutation transition effect. And it is a blue planet. So that is the relationship with the intensity and outintensity of the balancing. And there are many points on the field strength of the dove. There's many ways to do it. And you can do it by pushing, or you can do it by pulling. And so as part of the peacekeepers and prosperity keepers, the Keshe plasma science research teams need to come together to show how it's done and lead the way and help us advance in the research and also help us with the transmutation training as we learn how to fly. So we're in the midpoint between the February and the April sessions, coming up to the March sessions. We have to learn about transmutation. And so the range transition transcends the inertia field. That's what we have to do. So we have to have an inertia field of the transmutation dimensions, other dimensions, and those follow laws, the laws of conservation, and they govern the covalent, trivalent, and tetravalent bonding attributes, and we didn't say which dimension, which inertia, which energy state, because the containment of inertia is manifest through the contention of equality. So the soul of the man cannot be abandoned, and nor can it be compromised. And the color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man. This is the integrity of the man. And so the inertia, unity, consistency comes from the pathline of susceptibility that we all have, coming together with the emission of attention and the emission of retention, right? We are what we give our time and attention to. And this interacts to create the emission of intention. And everyone can see the truth, because this creates a balance of contention, the contention of equality. So set up the antenna, understand the difference between the message feeding and the feedback manifestation. This transmission has to be tuned to the various transition zones. Understand that the selection of one force is magnetical and balanced by the force selection of another gravitational force. So the resulting selection field is a Maglev manifestation. So the selection manifestation is predetermined. So who is doing the choosing? So your emission of intention is consistently affects the standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war by choosing the peace dome of intention. So the transmutation manifests in balance with the peace dome. So we all need to ask is, why does the earth need a peace dome? So suddenly, in our brief history, that's why it's sudden. But it's taken years to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, to achieve the greater oneness. 580 weeks in a row, the Knowledge Seeker workshops have tried to bring together this knowledge. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. It's the World Peace Treaty. Choose it. You're the one who has to choose it. You're the one who has to sign it. We are all four-wheelers in a three-dimensional feeding inertia. And there are no straight lines that connect the dots of these fields of inertia. Can we go into outer space without a peace dome? No, actually. So, is the present inertia governed by the dimensions of history? It all depends on who's doing the choosing. So how do we impart the transition of energy states of this inertia? So the interdependency is the consistent inertia of the physical transmission dimensions. And that's why the plasma science is being delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. I hope you all enjoyed today's session. You can unfasten your seatbelts now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for conveying more and deeper understanding, or your understanding of this knowledge. I think that's the way we put it these days. Let's see if any of the participants have a question or you've aroused any curiosity among those who are here and willing to open their mic. He talked about this new space fuel about the 2 hour mark in the last works, the 580. And he was saying how you can go to Mars and back with the new space fuel because you match the work of the universe within seconds. And the guy is playing fire games of the Chinese, meaning rocket technology. Developing that space fuel is a breakthrough. Otherwise, we would have been still with the magravs and magnetic fields, blah blah, and the rocket technology. What is he meaning there with the magravs? Is this the reactors that he said they use in the UFOs? A very fancy magnetic gravitational positioning, but he said before they were still in the matter state. But apparently, this new space fuel, and I know he referred to the space fuel as CH4 at one time, but maybe this is a development, he said, with this new space fuel, because you match the work of the universe within seconds. So perhaps we're totally going away from magravs. Although previously in the workshop, he said it would take centuries to get the full value out of the magrav or its type of what it can deliver. So perhaps the new space fuel, which will trigger you to, in a way, go to Mars, did anyone want to comment on that? Or Alex, would you like to comment?
Me again? So yes, there has to be a gradient. Otherwise, there's no motion. But there also has to be a field strength. So that is now going to change things. So if we are magnetical and the Earth is gravitational, then we obviously are attracted. But if we become with more gravitational, then we will be repelled. The thing is, we need to be self-contained in order to be a magrav. So we need to be self-contained within the magnetical outintensity and the gravitational intensity. And how we do that is the same way that we do that with the plasma. The rules are the same. So the big question is, how do we do that when we are in the physicality? Well, because the physicality is in the lowest energy state. If we want to travel in the lowest energy state, it will take the longest, and it requires the harshest of fuel, which can cause an explosion. But if we travel in the plasma state, then we could travel at a higher speed, and we could travel much more safely. And so this is part of the advanced science. But now we have a new advanced science. So we have to understand the limitations of the present science because the rules are the same. So there's an outer space density as well. How can that outer space density be when it is considered at this point in time from the physical state magnetical? So we have to realize that in terms of the physical state, the magnetical is actually gravitational. So if we have to defy that, then we have to give an equal and opposite force, and this is what they call inertia. So if we can break this inertia, in other words, put a force that's stronger, like a rocket, then we can go. But we seem to need a rocket, but birds don't need to take off with a rocket. I see fish jumping without a rocket. I see peregrines flying through the air almost 200 miles an hour without a rocket. And they stop on a dime without a rocket, without a gantry to capture them. So we are able, within our Earth space density, reverse the polarity. When I say we are able to, I'm saying it is physically possible. We are not skilled. So if the possibility is determined by the skill set. So we need to improve our skill set. And then once we understand that we can reverse the polarity with respect to our Earth space density, then we understand that the plasma density can be done the same way, and the outer space density can be done with the same way. But the difference is now we are operating at a much, much higher speed. And we can't measure that speed because the current measurements that we have are in the measurements of the physicality. And it's not a surprise, is it, when most of us don't admit to this advanced energy state? So why would we invent measurement? But do we have to be precise? Or would a gradient do? And since we understand how to create the material state, and we understand how to create the plasma state, then we can play the game. It's just like a good detective. You keep looking in the wrong place, and you come up with the same result. It means you have to look in another place. And it also may be the wrong place, but it'll just tell you how things work. And then you keep looking in another place, and eventually you find the answer. Not looking in the right place will never, ever give you the answer. And so many of us, we know the answer. We know the answer deep down in our soul. But we're scared to ask. Because if the truth be known, the truth is scary. But the universe is not scary. The universe is our friend, because our soul comes from the universe, and our soul is our friend. So it's a friend coming from the friend. but the friend will never lie, cheat, steal, or kill. So now we have to figure out how to reconnect with our friend, because we are being dominated by our enemies. It's not the way the universe works. This is our life lesson. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, let's see if anyone else has been triggered to ask a question or like to participate. He's talking about traveling anywhere instantly because he used the field strength of the magnetic fields of the plasma and not the matter state. And here's an interesting, the next sentence was, and the tool for this was given to you knowledge seekers from day one, the Ganses. But I thought the Ganses were a matter state condition. It's you who have to understand how to manipulate it. It's you who have to understand how to create it. It's you who have to understand how to connect that plasma to your soul to receive the field strength that you want, you need to manifest yourself to travel the span of the universe without physicality and the rest of this and the rest of it. So I think we're not quite there yet. Maybe some are closer than others, but it does seem like there's more understanding about the manipulation, the creation, and how they interact to get the strength you want to do something. And maybe this all comes through the emotions.
So I think you've answered the question as to why book number 1 is not book number 3 and why book number 3 is not book number 1.
Makes
Because
sense. Yeah.
what we're looking at is the creation of matter. We didn't say where.
Does he call it the creation of matters or matter? When we talk about matter singularly, usually that refers, I thought, to the matter state. When he talks about the creation of matters, then we're talking about the energy dimension with the plural.
You are correct. So, you have to have some kind of reference there, don't you? You have to.
Yeah, I think if we already understood it, we would have been doing it by now. And we are doing certain transmutations and other things and traveling, but I still think there's much, much more to gather here.
Well, of course there is, Mark, but the thing is, you don't want to alienate the people who are not, scientists, because that's the whole purpose here. This is a universal teaching. So we are all part of the universe. None of us can be extricated, out of the universe. It's like, you ever see someone who makes a muffin or a cookie? They have a cookie cutter. We're not cut from a cookie cutter. You can't just put a cookie cutter on the dough and then cut it and then pull the dough out and leave the hole behind and say, okay, that's you. Yeah, but you're hooked up to that hole. You came from that hole. Okay, so you cannot be extricated from the rest of the dough. You're part of that other dough. And so the next cookie cutter is going to cut another piece of dough. And then you say, well, wait a second. Hey, I'm one cookie, and then there's another cookie. But my cookiness is not the same as the other cookie, and yet we're both cut from the same dough. So if you can explain that question, and especially explain it to yourself and then explain it to your children, and then to understand that we are all interdependent, and you cannot extricate yourself from this interdependency because we're all part of the process. So if we're part of the process here, we're part of the process there. But where is here and where is there, and who does the choosing? And so that becomes the lesson. We're the ones who do the choosing. And then you say, well, why are you choosing this? You know, and you can kind of look in the mirror and say, it's your fault. So is it a fault, or is it a willful choice? Did you make a mistake, or did you do it on purpose? And so the only way that you can determine the answer to that is whether or not you're satisfied with your answer. So for a lot of us, we come up with excuses because the answer we have is unsatisfactory. So we'd like to fit the answer to our choice. Well, yes, if you want to question your choice, you have to fit the answer to your choice. But you don't fit the answer to your choice. You have to determine, when you make that choice, what would be the answer. So the answer is a product of your question, and the answer is an inertia state. So when you look at that answer, you have to understand that it came from somewhere. There was a reason. So if you don't understand that reason, then that shows you what you need to learn. And we all deserve to learn. That's why we're here. So we have to take comprehensive responsibility for our learning, for our knowledge. And whether we explain it as a baker making cookies, or whether we explain it as a plasma scientist or a knowledge seeker, that's our independent skill. But all of us, every single one of us, can explain it. But don't go substituting your knowledge with an idol, be it a statue, or be it a religion, or be it a guru, or a professor, or a dictator. Peace and prosperity comes within your own mind. Transitions to your family, transitions to your home. This is very hard to do when 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, peacemongers are blamed by warmongers. If it wasn't for the peacemongers, there wouldn't be any warmongers. So it's our fault. It's our fault we want peace and prosperity. Are you willing to take the blame for wishing well-being and harmony in the universe? That's why we all need to contribute to the Peace Dome, because obviously the Peace Dome is not doing the job for a reason. it needs reinforcement. So the peace dome becomes an inertia field of the humanity civilization. So the weak and the meek shall inherit the earth, because we will all be gravitational and stable once we understand the lessons. Thank you all for allowing me to continue to present, and we're all on this journey together. It is going to be a wild ride. It has been so far, and it is going to continue. And that's the fun of it. We have to see the future as bright and fun, because life, that's the intention of life, is for our enjoyment, is for our pleasure. And we can't have our pleasure if we can't share it with our neighbors. Thanks, everybody. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Alex. Is there anyone else who'd like to raise a point or a question? Yes, I think we'll be coming along at a faster rate over the next few years, but we'll have to see. But I think, again, the systems are there to support this work and to get us to a certain point, or to get a few people to a certain point, and then they'll share it with the others on the soul dimension, hopefully, what we'll see. But it's definitely moving forward, without a doubt. Anyone else? Did you see Alex's drawing on the graph there? I know was quite intrigued with the graphs, and she thought that maybe a few people could get together to explain them a little deeper. She'd like to know what she's doing. How did you make all those annotations on the graph that you had? Was that just from what you felt this is about? I know I was asking Klaus. He said only Mr. Kesh at that point in time could read the graphs. I'm just getting familiar with them, with the colors and things like that. Is there any question you'd like to bring up about graphs? I know you mentioned it earlier, if you're still there, or if you're not busy in the background.
I don't have anything to say right now.
All right, that's fine. There's no problem.
It's a very tough subject, Mark. So a lot of the information has come together from others. There's been a major contribution from MOSFEC, and it was really extremely helpful to me in putting the picture together. And
is this the one from the workshop?
No, this is a hybrid. The one that I showed last week was the one from MOSFEC, but the specific things that MOSFEC showed, I removed it and brought in what Mr. Kesh showed this week, because this particular graph was all the people who were on the Knowledge Seekers workshop.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
They were not connected by the UBESU, or they were not connected by their cell phones in terms of microphones or headphones. And of course, not all of them.
Now, do you think it was just the ones that their souls have been cataloged in a way? Or was it everyone that was in attendance there?
No, it was everyone that was in attendance.
Everyone in attendance. Okay, so we were basically on the same page, yes?
Well, you cannot extricate yourself from humanity. I mean, this is what I'm saying. You're looking at the graph of the dough. You're not looking at the graph of the cookie cutter. So
Right. Is this the dough in the matter state? Is this the dough in the plasma state? Both can be cut and formed.
this is the dough of the matter state because it shows how feedback dependent we are. This is you can see the contentious issues along the flat line. But even when we start to dabble, in the, beyond, wherever that is, we're still in the matter state because that's the majority are feedback dominant, and the feedback dominance comes from the matter state. So we cannot get the transmutation state, and this is the confounding thing. Now, that there are efforts and there are changes, and we're trying, because one of the reasons for everybody coming together is because of the common denominator. But just because everybody comes together doesn't mean they all have the same skill set. What we do all have is the matter state point of view, though. That's a fact. So we're trying to, and I relate this a lot to when I first learned, and to me it was kind of it stood out where they were what we call tree huggers. Imagine if you were a tree and someone comes up to hug you. Wouldn't you feel an aversion to that? Wouldn't you, feel, ooh, isn't that kind of repulsive? Does a tree really want to be hugged? So is the fact and the act of hugging the tree a demonstration of your affinity to nature? It's maybe emblematic, but it certainly isn't, shall we say, effective, because that's not how we operate. We are speaking of a different language. The tree does not speak a language. The tree does not have a mouth. But the tree does communicate. So if we want to communicate with that tree, we can't insist on communicating it our way, because now we're imposing on the tree. So you think the tree is not offended? Okay, well, I love your misguided intention of caring for me, but you're being disrespectful of my nature. And in my nature, I can communicate with you through my soul.
Yeah, but I think the tree can feel the emotion of the hug, even though I never thought that before. It certainly can feel that emotion of the touch of the
Yeah,
tree
so it doesn't
or the
need to
hug.
be hugged. Okay, otherwise
Maybe it's creating a new emotion for the tree. Could
oh,
that be
give me a
possible?
break. Give me a break.
Said no one's ever hugged me before in my entire
Oh,
400-year existence. Thank you.
the maple syrup is dripping right off the plate.
It's sweet too.
It is so sweet. Oh, no. And you know, that that is a misguided intention. So whatever you're intending is coming from your soul. And that's what we have to accept. We are feedback dominant. Oh yeah, I love you because I'm going to hug you. Really?
No,
Are
I
you
hug you
sincere?
because I love you.
Well, how many people, chop a tree down and cut it up into little bitty
Oh,
pieces and
yeah.
heat their home with it. I love you so much, and thank you for being there because you provide heat and energy in my house, and also I can cook my food with it, which comes from your other friends, your other vertical friends. I could cook some carrots
Yeah.
and some beets. And by the way, there's other horizontal friends. I could throw in some beef, maybe, and some chicken. And I really love you, and you taste good too. But this is the thing. So there is an interdependency. There's a kind of interdependency, and it's a structure based on what is missing, and that's our environment. So the tree shares that environment. We share the environment. So do the chickens, the cows, and the carrots. We all share that same environment. So what is the common denominator? And the common denominator right now, because we have what we have, and that is our feedback. That feedback is deficient. Hugging a tree is not going to change that. But actions stemming from our soul will. Because the actions that we've been dominating on are the actions of forcefulness in the physicality.
The
You know,
tree has a physicality, doesn't it?
well, of
Quite a
course.
big physicality. I think they can interact on the physical level myself. You may not, but that's just the way I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it.
Well, the tree is looking at it the same way, Mark.
Mhm.
So you're not alone in that point of view.
Right. The soul is hidden within the physicality of the tree, and so isn't our soul hidden within the physicality of the man. So I think we have maybe some common connection there, as we saw with who was the Bible man who would speak to the bees and the birds and the trees and the troops.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, but Mark, I didn't know where
Hey,
my soul was.
you didn't know where you're what?
I didn't know where my soul was,
No, I never did either till the Kesh Foundation.
but I didn't know that the tree had a soul.
I didn't either.
So I didn't know where the tree had the soul.
But your intentions were, I think, what was important.
Yeah, but now we know where the tree, the soul of the tree is. It's in the root.
Yeah.
So the tree root, it grows from the ground up. So if their soul is in the root, then our brain is our root. So we grow from the brain down.
Yeah, the bottom half is the rest of the physicality constructed, as I understand it. The half sphere. We're left with a half sphere, but the other half of the sphere is the rest of the physicality that's been created.
Yeah. But we have two interactions. We have a vertical interaction and a horizontal interaction. This is a unique characteristic. That's why it falls on us to discuss this subject. The trees help nature their way. We help in a different way. But when you look at the results, then you have to say that is the inertia field. So Everything we do is a creation. So you can create peace and prosperity, or you can create destruction. But everything is a creation. So who gets to choose? Well, that's the point. We do, as humanity. So as humanity, we have to have a compassion for humanity. Where do we see humanity having a compassion to others? We see humanity having more compassion for our pets than we have for our children. Then some have more compassion for the trees than they have for their children. It has to be equal. You have to have a compassion for life. All of it is life. You have to have a compassion for life. But we're interdependent. So we are 80% compliant and 20% deficient. That's not bad. But that's where Pareto's principle comes in, where 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. While we, the people, are hovering around 14%. However, we're just one step away from doubling that. And that will make a big difference. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment, ask a question, pose a thought, if you'd like to interact? Okay, I think that's fine. Either way, we all have more to understand and more to share, and this process is moving forward. So thank you all for being a part of it. May you be proud of the work you do, and may you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you're making, even though you may not see it every day. As we release the GANS waters, it goes out and does its work, and other things have their work. We don't always look for the confirmation of what we did, and we continue to learn to give and to elevate. I think this is part of the whole process. We're all learning, and I think we all have much, much more to learn. Randy says another great day of learning and sharing. Thank you, Randy.
Well, thank you all.